All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are back for part 2 of the discussion. So I've got a map of Finland, Sweden, and Norway over here on the left that ladies and gentlemen will be able to see. You can't see my screen, but they'll be able to see it all here. But anyways, what were we discussing before?
Statistics and IQ and stuff like that, what's necessary for.
That's right.
Well, actually, normally you wouldn't have to think about this in a free society if no one talks about it. But there's just someone who has to talk about it. They just have to. They can't help themselves. There'll
always be that guy, right?
Yes, and it's the left. They're saying, look, the women are not as much represented in CEOs as men are. Mm-hmm. Women earn less than men, like that. Those are statistics. And then they conclude, it has to be patriarchal oppression. And they say, look, blacks are doing worse than whites. It has to be racism. Just has to be. Because look at the statistics. So they're pointing to these statistics. And they're using them flat out blank as evidence for oppression.
As conclusions about individual actions.
Yes. And they're saying the reason there is a disparity between these groups can only ever be oppression because every single human being on planet Earth are the same. There's no genetic difference between any groups whatsoever. A man is identical to a woman in every single respect. A black is identical to a white, who is identical to an Asian in every single respect. There's no difference.
Which legally is true, but metaphysically and factually is not true. There are differences between people.
Yes, but if you take that assumption that everyone is born like we're all created equal, which is a creationistic idea, then you have to conclude that it's all oppression. And those who score well are going then to be targeted for redistribution and all of this stuff. So they are the ones who are forcing us to talk about statistics. They're saying, look at how bad this group is doing compared to this group. Now, that is bringing into the conversation something that we didn't really have to talk about. And we could have just shut up about it and just let things go the way they went. But people are people and they talk about things. And people think in groups. People think also ethnically and racially. It's just the way people are made up metaphysically. We can't help ourselves.
Now it occurs to me, let's think of a guy at a newspaper stand. He sells his newspapers to anybody. Doesn't matter what race they are, and that's his way that he's going to go through life until groups of black people start coming and beating him up every day.
That's right.
Then he's going to start thinking maybe the Chinese people aren't so dangerous, maybe the white guys aren't so dangerous, but those black guys seem to beat me up every day.
Yep.
So the facts on the ground, he wouldn't care about race and shouldn't, ought to, but people keep getting up in groups together and doing naughty things to him.
Yes. And the fact that people on the left particularly like to talk about groups all the time. They just can't help themselves. This is how their minds are made. The rest of us are forced to start talking, either first defending, I'm not a racist, and why are you not a racist? How do you explain the disparities? But then, if someone says, well, on average, this group has a higher IQ than this group, and that is why this group it does better on financially, economically than the other group, then in their mind, you're opening up the door to the Holocaust, to Jim Crow laws, and to slavery. So you really can't defend yourself. Either you are a patriarchal, racist oppressor, or if you defend yourself, you're definitely racist. So it's a lose-lose situation for you.
Born guilty. Yeah.
Yes. you have a choice between this being an unconscious form of systemic racism or an actual, real, conscious form of racism. There's no alternative for you to be other than a racist.
Yeah. So we have to reject this narrative.
So that is also why I think that it's, in the end, it is useful to talk about these statistical realities. And so let me take one thing. And rather than talking about this group is better or worse than that group, I'm going to try to undermine the idea that supremacy in itself leads to oppression. So I'm a form of supremacist. I'm an adult supremacist. I think that children, generally speaking, in almost every respect, is inferior to adults. They are less intelligent. They're weaker. They're not as mature. They're not as knowledgeable. They're not as patient. Just in every single respect you can think of, children are, generally speaking, inferior to adults. So I'm an adult supremacist. Yeah. Now, most people are adult supremacists. Does this mean that we have Jim Crow laws for children? Do we have child holocausts? Like, do we mistreat children because they are inferior? And the answer is no. Yes, there are people who mistreat children because they are weak. But generally speaking, we have enormous protection in place for children precisely because they are inferior. So it's not self-evident that just because you have a group of people who view themselves as supreme to the another group, that this automatically results in a Holocaust. So I just want to loosen up that idea.
Right.
And the other one is...
Well said, by the way. Well said, yeah.
Yeah. And the other example I'd like to give is America in the 1860s. Then you had a group of two white supremacist groups, the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats openly said that we're white supremacists and this is the reason we want to have slavery. But the Republicans, they had three factions within the Republican Party. You had the radicals. Those were the people who thought that blacks were equal mentally and cognitively in every single way to whites. And then you had the other faction, well, let's call it the right wing, for a lack of a better term. They were animal activists. They wanted to free the slaves for the same reason that you have people who want to have animal welfare, that we don't want to put cows in cages. So free the cows, treat cows nicely.
Free-range cows.
Free-range cows and free-range blacks.
Right.
So that was they regarded them as lower beings.
Yeah, but they wanted to be humane about it.
Yes. Treat the animals nicely, and they are almost like us. So since they resemble us humans, we must treat them very nicely, better than we would treat like a cow. Yeah. That was the other extreme part of the Republican. And then you had those who were in the middle, which were like Abraham Lincoln. They were saying that obviously they were not as capable as us whites, and when we're finished with war, we're going to send them back to Africa because they can't really live in a civilized society. But we're definitely not happy about this slave thing. But they're not animals; they're humans, but they're just not cut out for living in a civilized society. Those were the three factions of the Republican Party that freed the slaves, and that party consisting of 2/3 of them were white supremacists, and 1/3 were the radical factions that were the progressives that regarded blacks as equal humans. That group of 2/3 white supremacists went to a civil war to free the slaves. And their white people died on the fields to free these blacks.
Yeah. I had co-workers who once in a while say something snide racially, and I asked him, he's a black guy and a black girl, and I asked him, I said, hey, you know who started the Civil War? White guys. You know who won the Civil War? White guys. So,
yeah, and so the point is that if you just look at it from that point of view, that's like, okay, you had white supremacists on both sides of the war. One of them wanted slavery, one of them were abolitionists because they were white supremacists. Because, like, just like you have adult supremacists who want to treat children nicely, right? So I'm not making any judgment here on that white supremacy is like good or bad. That's not my point
just
here. I'm not a white supremacist.
Just to clarify the situation, right?
I'm not a white supremacist.
Okay.
I don't think in racial terms like this, but many people do think in race, and especially the left. And therefore, because they think in these terms, it's important to talk about it. And what I just wanted to dispel is the myth that just because you have one group who thinks they're supreme to another group doesn't mean that they will mistreat them. And you can actually apply this to the snooty elites. They think they're supreme. They want to rule the world. And they don't think that they will do a good job in doing that. So now, of course, they do a bad job most of the time, like unless you are talking about the elites in Singapore who do a good job. But they don't think that just because they are supreme, to like the Swedes who think they're morally supreme, just because they're supreme doesn't mean that they will mistreat people. They believe that just because they are supreme, they need to rule the world because they will do a better job at making a better life for people. So the left is not really coherent in their views here because they actually are supremacists themselves. They're not necessarily racial supremacists, but they're definitely supremacists.
Well, I mean, they are the masters of double speak and double think.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
So so to say that there's a dichotomy or incoherence,
what else is new?
They're going to raise a flag and say dichotomies. Yes, we knew it. Hegel, dialectic. We knew there were dichotomies everywhere. Yay, dichotomies. So you got them. They love you. Yeah, they're a mess, and they love their inconsistencies, and they thrive on inconsistencies. And if you say logic and reason, and they say white.
That's right. And in fact, that's actually not a joke. There are lots of people who say that science is like white knowledge, and it's unfair to the blacks because they have black knowledge, and it's like you just like this is literally how the Nazis were talking. They were talking about German knowledge and Jewish economy. That's what they called capitalism, Jewish economy. Because they were National Socialists, right? So they wanted to have a German form of economy. But like the very fact that you have people on the left talking about that and not seeing the irony of them talking about logic being white, and
well, the whole key about the left is groupthink and non-individualism. And anytime anybody shows any individualism, they are vacuumed into history.
If you allow me to go on a little bit of a rant here, I'm working on a book or several books with this as a topic in it. But after I studied Jordan Peterson more closely, I learned a lot about psychology that I wasn't aware of before. And one of the things I learned was that there's a strong correlation between certain psychological innate personality traits and political bent, what tendencies you have.
Oh, really? Okay, give me a little bit. Yeah, that's interesting. Can you say anything?
Those who are open-minded tend to be leaning left, whereas those who are border-minded tend to lean right. And this is one of those giant dichotomies, which is actually biologically based and leads statistically to pushing people in a left or right direction.
Now, maybe you better say what you mean by open-minded and border-minded.
I could say close-minded, but it doesn't have the same ring. So open border minded means that okay, I'll try to explain the biology behind this here. You have two fundamental forces at work in your brain at any moment. You have activation spreading, which we can roughly call associations. There's energy spreading in your mind. So when you are thinking about something, this creates energy that makes you think about something else. You have activity that spreads throughout your mind. If you only have activation spreading, you basically have water. You dip your finger in the water and it spreads out. That's not very intelligent. So if you have only activation spreading, then which is like the open mind, then you end up with no intelligence whatsoever.
So that's the D-type personality who goes from one thought to the next thought, and then boom, they're done. Because they've got two thoughts, they can't connect the thoughts back together. They don't go back to the first thought. They go from one to two, and then they blow it apart, and they're done. Okay.
It could be that we're going into the D and the various types, because
okay.
I mean I have my theories about that also, and it's a little bit more complicated than just what you said, but we'll get back to that. The opposite of in the brain of activation spreading is activation stopping, like you have inhibitors, activation inhibitors. So you literally have in your neurons little things that stops activation from spreading. And those are called inhibitors, neural inhibitors. And they are like little border controls in your mind. And if you only have inhibition in your mind, only inhibitors, you basically have a crystal. Like it's a dead rock. There's nothing, there's no intelligence there. That's a completely bordered mind.
Right.
So like the liquid, that's the open mind, and the crystal, completely crystalline, that's the completely border mind.
Well, so a mind starts out fairly liquid in some metaphysical sense when you're born, and moves towards a more crystallized structure over time without ever becoming fully crystallized.
That's right. And in fact, we have like a narrow area where we're on the edge of the edge of chaos and order, where we have this precise, nice mix of liquidity or activation spreading, openness and closedness. And that is where intelligence takes place. It's a very nice, narrow little area, and all people are in that area, but we can be a little bit leaning towards open mind versus border mind. So some people have an imbalance where they're more border-minded. It's only a minute difference, but it's enough that they are more rigid and things inside the box more often. So conservatives tend to be more border-minded. They like borders. They like rules, and it's easier for them to follow rules.
See, I think a person's going to be in charge of building this mind, so if they see that they need to put up a few borders inside their mind here and there, they can do that after the fact.
Yes. Now, notice that there's a strong element of personality to this. In other words, it's a heritability issue, but you have a free will, so you can go in one direction or the other. You can train yourself to become more open. You can train yourself to become more bordered. Just like you have if you have a weakling who has no muscles, but he can still exercise to build up his muscles, so he can become stronger, more muscled than the average person.
I would go with you here like this. I would say the open-minded people just haven't built up their muscles of thinking and building walls. And
no, it goes deeper than that. You don't have 100% control over what goes on in your brain.
No, you only have the control of building walls, and you only
but like you have limited ability to build walls, and it's also motivationally based. Sure. It's like you have less control than you would like. You don't have as much control as you would like. And in fact, here's the strange part. It's that the people who build most walls are the ones who have best control.
Well, I think of it like a farmer building ditches for water.
It's partially that, but
And-
it's also how easy is it to build a ditch. There are some places, some brains that are more conducive to that.
But once you do build the ditch, it's the question of cultivation. Here before you had a stream going through land, and now you have large fields of productivity.
But you're not just living in a finished field. There's entropy, and you always have to build new walls. You always have to maintain.
You harvest the crop, you hunker down for winter, you plant new crops in the spring. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so therefore, there's a strong element of personality in this. You can change, and you are flexible, but statistically, you can use statistics to say that if a parent has this gene and it passes on to the child, it's likely that the child is also going to have a similar kind of personality to the parent. So if you have two very open-bordered parents, it's very likely that they're going to get children who are also very open-bordered.
Well, there wouldn't be all these people coming over from the left. Dave Rubin.
No, listen. Just because you are, like, I score very, very high on open-mindedness on these tests.
It's a test about your beliefs.
No. It's a test about your. And listen, when I'm talking about open-mindedness, I'm not talking about your political beliefs. I'm talking about your outlook for what feels natural for you to do.
I didn't say political beliefs. It's a test of your beliefs.
It's more than that. Let me give you an example.
How could it be more than that?
No, I will give you an example. Do you agree that an autist has a mental condition that is not just learned?
Autistic? Artist?
Yes. Autist. Yes. Autism.
Autism. Do I believe it's genetic or?
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be genetic, but is it something that it's out? This is something you are born with, whether it's a brain damage or it's genetic or it's some kind of environmental influence that you cannot just simply change.
I believe that 95% of what they call autism and 100% of what they call ADHD is learned behavior.
Oh, well, okay. Now, when it comes to ADHD, it's in part learned behavior, but it's motivated by personality.
Yeah, there are severely autistic people who can do paintings on typewriters with the shapes of letters, but can't have a conversation with you.
Yes, and the thing is, like when you see a child from birth who has this, and they stay like this all their life, and they are born to a large degree the way they are, and you can say that they can make a change. They can have free will to change this. Yes, but there's statistics. Statistically, the probability of them being able to make that change is very low. So, for all practical purposes, when I'm talking about something being innate, it means that there's a very low probability of being able to change it. You can take that as a sort of like a working definition of it.
All right.
So, at the same time, you have also, on the opposite side, you have psychosis, complete loss of reality.
Yeah, I just want to mention Helen Keller, but anyways, go ahead.
Helen Keller was not autistic.
No, but I just mean that everyone would take her to be an idiot who we should lock in a room, but by getting to her conceptual mind through even this very bizarre way and difficult way which was done, and unlocking her conceptual ability, we turned her into that. So I think that might occur a lot with people with Asperger's or whatever like that. I think that it's just a destruction of their mind. And someone should have done what was done with Helen Keller to these people instead of what is done with them, which is to lock them away and give them mental punishment for being different.
But for whatever reason, autism is something that has very predictable behavior. We know properties of autists. And we know, and here's the thing. There is a spectrum, and whether it's innate or not, this spectrum is something that we can describe. And in fact, we can use the autist as the extreme example of a border-minded person. And so we can think of him as the ultimate conservative, the extreme conservative. And if you go in the other direction, when you get so far that it becomes sickly, when in the other end of the spectrum you get to psychosis, where you're so open-minded that you cannot distinguish between reality and fantasy. There are no borders between your thoughts and reality. Perception and thoughts are blended all together. So this is a very useful model where you have this spectrum where you have autism on the extreme right and you have psychosis on the extreme left of this model.
And mental health is in the center.
Yes.
By this view.
And most people, they are not there at autism or there at psychosis. They are right here, just a little bit around the center. Yeah. So I'm not saying that conservatives are autistic and leftists are psychotic.
Right.
But you're on a spectrum, and you can use these extremes just to have a visual representation of, if I just scale this down a little bit, I can see where if you go a little bit, tiny bit in the autistic direction, you see a conservative.
I'll tell you what, it sounds pretty a pretty interesting way to view it right now, because I can just hear somebody saying the liberals have come up with another cockamamie scheme, they've dropped the context and they're ignoring reality, so that's psychotic. Or the conservatives have come up with another cockamamie scheme. He's been listening to his pastor at church and it's getting into his brain.
You can say that, but now comes the really fun part. You can learn from autists, and you can learn about conservatives from autists. So what is the defining character of an autist? And I'm talking like a really, really badly autistic child. If the autist is so border-minded, and we know this for a fact because there are actually autists who have been able to come out of autism in an adult age and describe what autists are like. In fact, there's an autist who came out a long period of working with herself. She's still suffering from some of this, but she was able to write a book about autism, and she's now in animal care, taking care of farm animals, because she understands how they think because of her autism. So she's designing farms and stuff and slaughterhouses because she can think like a cow. And she's had enormous success with that. It's just amazing. So here's the thing, that based on what she has been telling and from what we know from autistic research, they are extremely border-minded, so extreme that they are unable to integrate. Unable to integrate.
Which is essentially the same as the psychotic people who are also unable to integrate.
But now, yes, but for a completely different reason. So if you put up too much borders, you're unable to integrate into a greater whole. You're unable to conceptualize. So what the effect of this is that you cannot see similarities between things. You cannot create form concepts. So if I go into a kitchen and I see that there's a chair standing in the left corner, and I move that chair to the right corner, then when I come into the room as a normal human being, then I see, oh, here is a kitchen, and there's this chair that has been mutated. It's been moved from this position to this, but it's still a kitchen. So it's just that this chair has been moved a little bit. Whereas an autist who comes into this kitchen and sees this chair that has been moved from the left position to the right, he goes into a hissy fit, because this is no longer a kitchen. He doesn't recognize the place. It's something completely different. It's chaos. What did someone do to my kitchen? I don't recognize it. Yeah. So he's not able to conceptualize that the chair that has been moved, goes back to Ayn Rand's theory of removing the variation in the variables.
Measurement omission.
Measurement omissions, right. They are not able to do that at all. So for them, moving that chair makes this a completely different room.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go in
the other side, I was going to say, they never do measurements. They stay only with the omitted measurements. They only omit.
Yes.
Go ahead. No, go ahead and say exactly what you're going to say. Don't really answer me.
Yeah, you're right. But what they do is they overgeneralize. They overgeneralize. So, if I'm sure you've seen this, YouTube videos on this. You can find lots of them. It's the same song. Like where someone's playing the same chord progression. There's a certain set of chord progressions that 90% of all pop songs have, and so they're playing the same chord progression with a different song just for a little bit, and it's and when you hear it, it's like, oh, it's the same song. And the point is, the people who hear this song, this chord progression, and think it's the same song. If they think this naturally, that this is a very boring thing because it's always everything sounds the same, they are they are generalizing so much because they're able to see the similarity between. They're integrating on steroids.
Right. So that would be. So that's why people at the far spectrum edge might be the ones that come up with a new type of music, because everything they hear, they're like, boring, same, heard it, same, right. All this is the same. Here's what we need, guys. We need new stuff.
Yes. Yep. And so, in other words, that's why they can be creative, because they are able to break out of patterns, and the other don't get bored of those patterns, because to them, one song that has this chord progression doesn't sound like the other one, you just change the note from this place to that place, and then now it's a completely different song.
Or the rhythm or whatever, they slow it up, they slow it down a little bit, or they speed it up, or they just do a different rhythm to the beating of the strum, and it changes the whole song to, apparently.
Now it's completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
But now comes the interesting part. Suppose that an autist goes out into the street and he sees a black guy with a red hat who robs him. And then later, he sees another black guy with a blue hat. He's going to see them as completely different people. He doesn't recognize that they had anything in common, because, hello, the one had a red hat and the other had a blue hat. They're not the same. They look completely different. I don't see any similarity between them. They're just completely different. Whereas if someone is very open-minded, who overgeneralize, who's on the left, he sees a black guy with a red hat and a black guy with a blue hat, he sees them as the same. He cannot think of them as individuals. He sees them only as representatives of a category, like a race, or his gender.
Or a group, his gender, his group,
Right. So the reason you have all this crazy identity politics on the left is because they cannot think in terms of individuals. They can only think in terms of groups, because they overgeneralize. When they see blacks, they only see a black person. They cannot see an individual behind the blackness. So he can only be a representative of the same song or the same race. You see?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the answer. Then is not racism on the right, but individualism.
Now, what I just said completely shatters the idea that racism is a problem on the right, because the further right you come, the more autistic people become, the more incapable of seeing similarities across groups. It's on the left people see all those similarities, and it's why. So and now I can say that's why the Nazis were on the left. They had some conservative traits that they wanted order. It's because they had too much disorder. But even so, they were very capable of generalizing and thinking in groups. So they were creatures of the left, but they become very totalitarian within that way of thinking. And now think about the following. Before I said that if I mention race and IQ, an open-minded person who doesn't have any borders in his mind is going to say, oh, race, IQ, I associate that with white supremacy and Jim Crow laws and the Holocaust. So therefore, they make this quick activation spreading.
Well,
starting.
I think what they do is they just check with what's safe, because the people on the left are group thinkers, and they just, when you say something, they say, oh, what's safe for me to do in this? And
there are some people like that, but I'm not talking about the thinkers, those who create these ways of thinking. So the
do I mean the thinkers? I just mean everybody. That's how everybody on the left is. You say something to them, and they immediately say, what's the safe opinion?
But they don't think that inside their head. That's not what they're thinking. Actually, I shouldn't be reading their minds, but in fact, mind reading is a sign of open-mindedness. If you see someone say something and you assume that you understand what they're thinking based on what they say, then you have made this leap of association. Someone who's autistic takes things very literally. They can't understand a joke. They can't understand the intention behind a joke because they only hear the words literally. Right? So the autists can't understand jokes. That's why all the humorous people are on the left. They're open-minded.
Wait, there's nobody funny on the left.
Not anymore because they're angry.
The left can't meme. The left has no comedians.
But they did. They had.
Yeah. Now, the left...
Consider the Jews, for instance. Jews, for whatever reasons, have, through self-eugenics or a cultural selection, have produced a lot of highly, highly open-minded people. And therefore, among the Jews, you have extremely creative people. That's why they're overrepresented in creative arts, such as in actors. You have them as comedians. You have them as musicians. You have them as writers. Those are creative arts that require open-minded thinking. But it also is a partial explanation of why so many Jews tend to lean left, because open-minded people will tend to think in groups. They will tend to think collectively. So I'm not going to make a theory of why they are like this, but they have been putting themselves under natural selection for 1,000 years that has led to a lot of weird genetic diseases. So they are sort of like a living experiment of what you can do if you self-select over a period of time. Which is interesting in and of itself. And of course, this has led to a lot of people, this is like the alt-right people, they will then immediately take this, the Jews, they are like their own little clique elite race that are trying to control the world and all of that. I think that's very a simplistic way of viewing it. Just because you have statistical patterns within a group doesn't mean that you now have an understanding of how that group thinks or like that. For instance, men are dramatically overrepresented on murders. Like almost all murderers are men. Almost all violence is performed by men. But almost no men are murderers. It's just because of the makeup of our bell curve. We're slightly more shifted in aggression on the aggression bell curve, on the aggression spectrum, and therefore our outliers will be just blown up out of proportion compared to women who are more on the other end of the spectrum statistically. But the point of it here was that the left are the ones, or let me change that into people who are open-minded are the ones who tend to overgeneralize. Therefore, those are those who are most prone towards racism or sexism or groupthink.
People who are open-minded and haven't set borders in their mind are most susceptible to dystopian fantasy thinking, and they're the ones that are seduced by propaganda.
Yes, but don't give up the autists yet. Like Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl, who is now on an environmental apocalyptic thing.
Okay.
She is almost autistic. She's an Asperger, and she takes things literally. If you tell her that the world is going to end in 12 years, she believes that because she takes it literally. That's hyperbole by those who want to save the world, but she takes it literally. So she has anxiety attacks because she feels that in 12 years the world is going to end. So the point is that it's not as simple as saying that open-minded people are like this and close-minded people are like that. It's a strange mix of things. Those who are border-minded have their vulnerabilities too. Like Greta Thunberg, she takes things literally, so she believes in this environmental dystopia, which is far left. Despite the fact that she's very open, border-minded, she doesn't have a creative thought in her mind. She's extremely rigid and bordered, and of course, you can argue that she, because she's in a panic mode, she's now going full totalitarian. So there's nothing that prevents someone who's autistic from starting to think in totalitarian ways. So it's not as simple as saying that people who are open-minded are on the left and people who are border-minded are on the right. It's much more complicated than that. But there is a tendency for that.
So here's what I have. There's the integration, and there's disintegration and misintegration. They meet over here, but misintegration is this line, and disintegration is this line. So this is the autistic people, and this is the left, and this is the right, and they come to a disaster. They end up in the same place in a disaster, even though they seem to be miles apart at different points.
Yes.
And over here, miles away from their ultimate thing is to integrate things. Some sort of diagram like that, if we have to make diagrams. And everybody has to make diagrams. We have to do it.
It's very important.
Yes.
I like that. I would like to add, though, that there are different ways of being a D. You can be the Kantian disintegration type, who's like a very structured kind of D type. So I would compare Kant to Greta Thunberg. He's like an autist, but he has a system for destroying the world. Very, you see what I mean? He's very border-minded in his thinking.
He might be D2. There's D and there's D2.
Yes.
D squared.
D1 and D2, yeah. So he's definitely D2 in that category according to Peikoff.
Yeah.
But his way of being a disintegrationist is by being in a very systematic way. Whereas someone who's disintegrationist because they're hippie-like, that's a different way of being disintegrationist.
Yeah, and I just have to say, I remember of Peikoff, I think he said something like, Kant is the ultimate D2.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And that most D types are just D1. It's hard to have a D2 type. And D is the temporary. M is the long term anyway. So
because
D2 is even more unstable.
It's not stable with D. It's always a transition.
Yeah. So D2 is even more unstable. So D2 can't be a stable type. D1 is the only thing that could be massively seen. And so Kant is one of the rare D2. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that, yeah.
It's great, but this trichotomy of Peikoff, which I love, this is one of the reasons I actually hold Peikoff in high regard, despite him being off on a few topics, and he's not perfectly good on all topics.
Mention one, because I have problems with Amy, but I haven't had problems with Peikoff. I wax for the days of old Peikoff.
Oh, I miss old Peikoff. I do, because after this new wave of leftivists, he seems like we really miss him. But like he was for a while, he was very like he was vote Democrat because the Republicans are going to go for M2 Christianity.
Yeah, that annoyed me very much.
It's like that's so off base, and he completely misunderstands everything. And I think that it's in part because he doesn't understand. Like he's been brainwashed a little bit by the Enlightenment propaganda from the Enlightenment. It's a narrative that the Enlightenment philosophers like to have about Christianity, that everything that came from the medieval thought was bad, and everything that came from the Enlightenment was good. I understand why they did that, because they wanted to push their agenda. But it's like we can't forget that Aquinas, he was a Catholic, and he was an M1 type, and he was definitely part of the medieval thought. He wanted to integrate faith and reason, which is like why the Catholic Church even today has faith and reason as their slogan. So,
well, Aquinas is such a good guy because of reason, not because of faith.
No, but like you can say that, but he wasn't a bad guy. He tried to deal with faith in a productive manner, and I see this now more clearly, that it's actually disintegrationist to believe that we can get rid of faith entirely, because that's part of the progressive disease. Like we are completely blank slates, and we owe nothing to our past. The problem is this: we find language in every single corner of the planet. Every single society has language. So we know that language is in part genetically based. We're born with a language instrument or language organ.
All right, now Singapore is knocking at our back door as we say this. Can we build a society, a stable, big, nice society up out of nothing from mud huts?
We can, but I'll get back to that. But the thing we can't get rid of is faith. Faith is extremely difficult to get rid of, extremely difficult, and the proof is that every single society, every single one, has produced religion.
Now, now I've covered that. I said the reason for that, and that's because you have either reason or you have altruism.
I understand that you say that, but the fact that you have no place on the planet that you have reason, you have faith everywhere. There's no society where reason sort of have taken hold.
Greece.
Faith.
Greece, Britain.
No, they had gods. They have
America. Then
no, you still have. So here's the thing: even atheists are mostly religious. In fact, it's sad to say, but 90% of atheists are evil. They're evil communists.
Well, I'm gonna stand with Greece, because Greece had laws, and they thought that the gods were corrupt up to no good, and half human anyway.
That's okay, but they still had gods.
And they disregarded the gods and looked down on the gods, and they thought that the gods were jealous of humans, which they were. The gods were always hating on the humans.
Maybe so, but look what happened to Greece. It was run over, right?
But no, I just want to mention a society that where religion, where I don't think faith, whatever you call faith, I'm not going to give you Greece, and I'm not going to give you Britain, and I'm not going to give you the United States.
Okay, it's a transition. Like, it was destroyed, and it was destroyed because it wasn't able to hold on. It's not a stable solution. And let me give you some evidence for this.
Now, what is a stable solution? What holds on? What remains?
This is a very, very open question. But one thing I'm sure of is that if you're just trying to get rid of religion, that's like walking in a desert without compass. You're probably going to be walking in circles.
Well, I think what I want to do, I like the American system. We're not going to get rid of it. What we should do is make sure that nobody can make any laws at all regarding religion. None.
Now I'm not talking about politics at all. I'm just talking about the psychological aspect of it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Phyllis, okay, so are we always going to have religious people with us? Yes.
Yes.
And even if we shut down the churches,
yes, it's going to pop up.
People are going, and here I can prove it because there's now a religious law at my local grocery store. They have a tithing at my grocery store now for the religion of the environment. I have to pay 10 cents for every.
Environmentalism is a new form of religion. And it grew out of atheism.
Every plastic bag costs 10 cents now.
Yes, that's a religion.
Yeah.
We're sort of giving offerings and sacrifice to the plastic god.
To the god of the lakes and mountains.
That's right. And that's not the only god, only religion. You have Marxism, the statism, and there's a direct correlation between how much you believe in God and whether you're a statist. So the people who are normal religious people, they believe in an omniscient, omnipotent, supernatural God. And as you stop believing in this omnipotent being up in the sky, you start believing in the omnipotent being here on earth, which is the state. Just like with the aliens, like people used to believe in elves, and then they thought that was silly, so they started believing in aliens instead. There's just a new religion that took its place. And so it's very, very difficult to get rid of religion. So you can be 90% certain that someone who declares himself this today, like, I don't believe in God anymore, you're 90% certain that this guy here is going to believe in the environment, he's going to believe in statism or some kind of secular religion. He's going to invent a religion to fill his gap, the religious hole in his heart, the God-shaped hole in his heart. Yeah. And that's something that we have to take in. There's always going to be a snake in the garden, I said earlier, but there's always going to be a God in the garden too. And
well, the snake being Satan is a god of some kind. So
yes, but it's not the same. Maybe it's an M and D type god.
There's always an angel and a devil, and both of them are up to no good.
Yeah. So evolutionary speaking, like we can understand our mind as consisting of unconscious sub-persona. It's like little cartoon types. So we have a hunger personality saying, food, I want food now, or I want sex now, or an envy sub-personality. I hate him, kill him now, like this. So we have these tiny little voices in our head. And these are evolutionary evolved beings. And like, think about this. You are only a few decades old. You have only lived one life. These tiny sub-personas, they have lived for millions of lives through other people. And they've been naturally selected to be able to influence you from below as unconsciously. For millennia, eons.
Do you know the blood flowing in your veins hasn't stopped all the way back for 1.3 billion years or something like that?
Something like, yeah, that's crazy.
It's gone all the way unbroken. It has not stopped. There's been blood flowing through this creature that we are for 1.3 billion years.
And you can do the same thing with the stem cells. Like all stem cells are 4 billion years old.
Stem cells.
Yes, that's the cells that
everything starts. That's a crazy thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
Who needs religion? See, who needs religion?
Yeah, but I understand. No, I'm not sort of like making a big case for why we need religion. Religion needs it.
No, Christopher Hitchens said that we'll have it as long as people are afraid of the dark. So get comfy. It's going to be here.
And also, it was probably naturally selected. In other words, there was a time that religion aided in our survival, and therefore we have genes that make us eat more. It's easier for us to become religious.
I have another way I can do that. I can say that the religious social structures that came about, if they were beneficial, then they helped their society thrive over the long term, and if they weren't beneficial, they killed those societies off. Therefore, stable structures tend to be the long-term religions that occur for the very reason that they are long-range and long-term. Yes. So I can do that. I've already got that. And then the other thing you were going to say, I've got that covered too. I can't remember what you were going to say. Let me see if I can. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Many people today talk about memetics, like and cultural evolution and stuff like that. A point that Jordan Peterson has made is that Richard Dawkins wasn't radical enough, because if you take cultural evolution for a long enough time, then you're going to get cultural selection of your genes. In other words, if you have a culture that stays around for long enough, it's going into your genes, baby. And I can prove it.
Well, let's see. Okay, go ahead.
The Germanic people...
Everybody reproduces, though. Ugly most of all.
The Germanic people have genes for lactose tolerance. And this is because for 5,000 years ago, agriculture came to Northern Europe.
Okay.
But things don't grow in Northern Europe. So a way to get more calories out of cows is, rather than to slaughter them and eat the meat, you ate their milk instead.
Incidentally, there are Africans who live on cows, who have cows.
Yes.
And
but they are also lactose tolerant.
Yeah, now
with different kind of tolerance. Genes.
I want to mention here that it is actually has been proven genetically that sub-Saharan Africa has more genetic diversity than the rest of the world.
Yeah, of course, but diversity is just a measure of how old your group is.
That is exactly the case, and the rest of the whole fucking world is one group. And then Southern Africa has the other 97 groups.
But there's a big problem with that way of thinking. And it's that most of the diversity that you're talking about is just noise. It's just accumulation of noise.
Yeah, it's 40,000 or maybe 100,000 year old noise. Yeah, so.
Yeah. So let me give you an example. Dogs have much less genetic diversity than just non-Africans. If you take all the non-Africans in the world and just ignore Africans, which are so different from the rest of the world, and just look at the genetic diversity of the rest of the world and compare it to dogs, dogs have as little, no more diversity than that. So a tiny little poodle has the same kind, is genetically extremely close to being a wolf.
Right. Yeah.
So my point is, if you do the selection game, you don't have to have a lot of genetic diversity to produce a lot of difference. Like a poodle and a wolf are almost genetically indistinguishable.
Yeah. Well, just put Michael Jordan next to, I can't think of some little Japanese koji girl or whatever they're called. These girls who wear these little costumes. 7 foot and 4 foot one. I mean, and
they're the same species, and they're separated by a very tiny, a minute amount of difference.
Exactly.
So, my point here was that we can talk about diversity, and that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But my point was only that once you have a culture, that culture is going to actually impact the genes of that culture.
Right.
And now people don't like talking about that, because that means that if you're living in a very bad culture, you're going to get genes that make you survive in a bad culture.
Yeah.
Or if it lives for a long enough time.
Zsa Zsa Gabor, when Zsa Zsa Gabor was on stage one time with Humphrey Bogart, one of these guys, Zsa Zsa Gabor says, he said, "Have you had your vaccines, darling?" She says, we Europeans grow up in pure filth. We don't need vaccines like you Americans."
That's true. But so, since we're on to that topic about diversity, I'm going to make a YouTube video in the future. I'm probably going to start doing more with my channel next year or something when I'm finished my studies, which takes a lot of time. But the title of my YouTube the video is going to be something like there's less racial differences than you think there is. And the reason is the following. It's people don't understand that sex is actually a survival organ. It's an organ that each individual uses to store up genetic diversity in a group that they hang out with. So that it's a distributed, it's like a genetic cloud storage. So you're storing lots of diversity in the cloud, in the group, and whenever you need some gene that's available in the cloud, you just pick it up from the cloud and you multiply it, replicate it up. And this makes you much better at survival. Because if you need this lactose tolerance thing, there's probably some guy in the group that has this. So a lot of your ancestors had to die because they were not capable of surviving without lactose tolerance. Yeah. But then these guys who had this lactose tolerance gene, they were having kids like crazy, and they could drink this milk. And people were saying, hey, this friend of mine, this in my group, in my tribe, he's having lots of babies and he's very successful. I want my child to have be married with his kids so that we can get some of his good shit. Mm. And in this way, you can spread around the genetically stored information that's in the cloud. Now, and you can just this allows you to adapt very quickly. It requires and have your lineage survive.
But it requires death. You've got to kill off the ones that aren't up to, and the other ones take over.
It doesn't require death. It only requires reproductive successful differences in the frequency of success. So if you have one child
and a bit of death too.
Yeah, of course. But death is one way of achieving that. But it's like if you can only raise one child, and the other guy who has the good genes can raise two children, then in just a few generations, his genes are going to take over in the tribe.
Yeah.
But the point is, you get to have a chance to marry your children with one of his children, so your lineage will survive. Mm-hmm. So sex is a survival instrument, a tool for shifting very quickly around your genes so that your lineage survives. Now, what this means is that we're able to shift our genetic makeup in a short amount of time.
Now, who though? Let's just remember that 99% of women reproduce, but only 65 or 70% of men reproduce. So the question of shifting our genetic lineage means choosing men, the women choosing men.
Yes, it does. But and that's usually how it goes. So you can see that there's like a focal point for this, and that's an interesting discussion in and of itself. Like one of the consequences of this is that men are disposable, and they have actually, because of that, acquired disposability genes. Men look upon themselves as disposable.
They feel like they're indestructible. They're brave. They'll rush into a battle that they're going to die in.
That's disposability genes. Because men and women have two different outcomes in a war. Women, they're raped and they're taken as sexual slaves, but they're surviving, they're passed on. Men are killed, their lineage dies. So when you go into a battle, you have only one outcome. Either you are going to die in battle, or you're going to get killed after the battle if they win.
Ladies and gentlemen, given that fact, who should run the army?
It's the man, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So it's talking about genetic difference and so forth. I want to get back to how small the difference between between groups really are. This is just absolutely fascinating, because there was a Russian scientist, always a Russian, and he did an experiment on natural selection. He took a group of rats, like lab rats, and he says, "I'm now going to create a split. I'm going to breed one group of them into becoming more aggressive, and the other one I'm going to be more meek and tame." And so he was taking the most aggressive individuals in one group and allowing them to reproduce, and the most meek and tame in the other group. They started from the same genetic basis.
Now, I'm familiar with this they used foxes, though.
Yes, that's the same. It's the same experiment,
Okay.
but with different animals.
Uh-huh.
And so they repeated, always a Russian, they have to repeat the...
Because it might be different with the different animals.
Yes, absolutely. And what they found is that they were able, within 20 to 25 generations, to shift from one end of the bell curve to the other side of the bell curve. That's crazy.
That's like, but that's like 12 years or something like that. I mean, or maybe, I mean, that's pretty, or
yeah.
less. How long is the gestation of a dog? 6 months, 3, 4 months, 2, 3, 4 months to get from one birth to the next? Like, you could turn 2 or 3 generations of dogs a year.
Yes, but it's typically like more like 1 year. They're annual based.
Right. Oh, that's true. That's true.
They're on the annual cycle. If you see the wolves, they have in the spring. They have it. That's when they have their.
In laboratory controlled conditions, you could probably get it. But you were talking about rats, which you can do much quicker anyway.
Yeah, they can do much quicker.
I just want to mention.
Are selected.
I just want to mention that the length of the jaw, the height of the ear, and the length of the incisor canine all increase with aggression.
Yep. And there's a lot of cool like research done on epigenetics and aggression. Like Africans have a gene. It's not all Africans, but it's most common in Africans that have selected for a gene that is epigenetically turned on to become aggressive under certain circumstances. And the circumstance is this: if they have a peaceful upbringing, if they are the stable society, everything is happy-pappy, the gene for aggression is not turned on. If, however, they experience war, turbulence, violence, family disruption, the gene is turned on. And this means that in Africa, where this was an adaptive feature, you have so much tribal warfare in Africa that you have they just like you have in the Germanic tribes have this what's it called, the lactose tolerance gene. They have this aggression gene that they can turn on almost at will, so to speak.
Now I can do that with ideas. I don't need to use a gene for that.
No, but it's very useful if you have it as genes, because ideas can die, but genes are more permanent. So what happens is that the genes is that if nothing bad happens, everything is peaceful. But if someone attacks you and there's war, and those children who have this gene, the men who have this gene, and they experience this warfare, they become like crazy aggressive and want to fight.
See, I don't think you need a gene to do this intellectual work. I think we can do that intellectual work with ideas.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that it's very, very helpful to have a gene that does that. And in Africa, they actually have a gene that has done this work, and it's been selected for. That's my point. It's like, it's not deterministic. It's not like everyone who has this gene becomes this, but you get this statistical bump, and it's been so. When you have all these problems in the African American community today, one way to understand this is that once you took away the fathers, would you get fatherless families? This makes especially people of African descent, very susceptible. Those who have this gene, they become ultra aggressive, and you get this gang-related violence. So people who are saying now that Africans, there's so much, they're killed, black on black crime is so high, and those who are very racially oriented, they're saying this is just how Africans are. I'm saying, well, if they had good fathers, this gene that motivates them to become like this would be turned off, and they would become just normal, civilized people like the rest of society.
This gene, I can do all these things with ideas. I don't know about this gene. I'd have to have...
Now, here's the thing. This gene also exists in the European populations, but mostly not in the agricultural population. Like Finland has more of this gene, so they have much greater problems with violence than other of the neighboring countries, and they have more alcoholism. And there's one country where this gene is non-existent, zero. There's nothing. There's no people in this. It's been exterminated.
Is it Iceland?
No, it's not in Europe.
Oh.
Can you guess which country this is?
Japan.
China.
What? They got a huge population. I don't know what you're talking about now.
Oh yeah. Well, they do have. I'm talking about those who are ethnically Chinese. You do have all the Uyghurs and all these multicultural blah that are not generally speaking the Chinese languages. But though, if you take those who are ethnically or racially Chinese, that go back and they've spoken the large Chinese languages, all the genes for aggression have been weeded out. And this is probably a sign of very unnatural selection. This probably disappeared in the Chinese in the last 4,000 years. And it's part of the empire. The emperor had a very nice strategy. Whenever there was civil unrest, he just killed people. And he's been selecting for people who don't riot. And this is why, like in China, this riot thing is very... They have had riots for 4,000 years there because empires, that's what happened in empires. That's why the thing that's going on in Hong Kong right now, their impulse is to kill these people because they need to get rid of the riots, because there's been riots for 4,000 years, and that's their way of dealing with riots. They kill them. And the result of this is that those who are the most aggressive, those who are most rebellious among the Chinese have been weeded out. So the Chinese are genetically probably more likely to be deferential. They're meek and they're passive, and they don't want to have any trouble. Just by genetics of it, they have been bred like the rats. Yeah. And it's not like that a Chinese can't be aggressive. Obviously, just look at Hong Kong, what's going on right now. But even though the protesters there are very peaceful, but it's like it's the psychological makeup. Just like you have a makeup for lactose tolerance, you can have a psychological makeup, something that just nudges and pushes you in a specific direction. It doesn't mean that you are determined by it, but it shifts the statistics, it shifts the probabilities, so that there are fewer people who are like this. It's like with why are there so few women who are murderers? Well, it's not just the ideas, it's actually something about the biology of men that makes them more susceptible to murderous rage.
Well, there are murderers in China, so we have to do something now.
Yes, absolutely. Now I ended up with talking about this. But my point was this.
I'll just return and say I can do all that with ideas. I don't need genes. I don't know about these.
You can do it with ideas, but you can also do it with genes. And it's not that it's either genes or
I didn't see you
ideas.
do it with genes, though. I didn't see you do it with genes. I mean, it clearly happens, and I believe it happens through ideas.
Oh, it happens through ideas as well, but it's unless you say that behavior is not part of evolution.
Okay, you're right. You're right. If there's a bell curve and IQ distribution, then there's some part of the conversation that we have to have here.
Yep.
About this.
And not just IQ, but there's just like 10 certain personality traits. Maybe you're just naturally very irritable. Like you easily get annoyed. It's nothing that you can do anything about. You just like get annoyed for some reason. And it's something in your brain that makes you do that. It's not something you can choose. You're just born naturally annoyed. You're probably going to have a different life than if you're not born naturally annoyed. You see what I mean? So I'm not talking about determinism in behavior, but the genes nudge you by motivating you psychologically. So the pain mechanism is a psychological mechanism. And you do agree, I hope, that pain and pleasure has evolved by natural selection and that it influences behavior.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely do that. Sure.
Yeah. So those have to have a genetic basis. And anything that is of importance long-term with the brain or mind has to have a genetic basis.
All right.
So intelligence didn't evolve just because it was a good idea. It has to have a genetic basis. In fact, this is one of the reasons when I answer those who claim that IQ can't possibly be genetic, then I ask them, well, how do you think that our human intelligence evolved then? We're clearly more intelligent than apes. Was that just not part of evolution? Like, evolution can only occur if two prerequisites are fulfilled. Number one, it has to be genetic. If it's not genetic or heritable, then you can't have evolution. Number two, it must be objectively measurable. You have to be able to say that this thing here is more than this thing here.
I was going to say it's got to be selective. Some have to be left out.
Yeah, but okay, that's part of the genetic part, right? But you have to be able to compare two versions of it and say this thing here is better than that, or this one is more than that.
More than it reproduced and the other one died off.
Yes, but you have to be able to measure that, like objectively with a stick.
Okay, all right.
A measure stick.
Right.
So, for instance, if you say that the giraffes have a long neck, and that the length of the neck evolved through natural selection, then you have to say, I have to be able to measure the length of the neck. I have to have an objective way of doing that.
Okay. If they have developed a genetic predisposition for violence, we have to have some measure for that. Like we would have to see that they get locked up disproportionately for violent reasons.
Yes. And so in other words, natural selection cannot act on something that doesn't have an effect in reality. Natural selection can only act as on things that objectively exist. That when I say objectively, it means that natural selection can see it, can measure it. So natural selection is a measuring device. It measures the degree of success, basically, of something that really exists.
Now, by the way, that's why there are more black people in the NBA than white people, because all white people survive, nobody dies. But in Africa, you have to be physically healthy. You have to be able to run and jump, or else, and you have to be able to go days without food or whatever. You have to be a pretty healthy person to survive in Africa.
Yes, precisely. And so there are many reasons for this, like you have various survival strategies. And so people, for instance, who say that women can do all the things that men can do, these people are insane because obviously men can't do everything women can do. Women are much, much better at giving birth than men are. So there are very few men who give birth compared to women, so if women have a biology that has been specialized for giving birth, and that they are supreme at doing that, they're much better at men at it, and they even have mobile feeding bags, the breasts. So it's like they're really specialized for this task. and that comes at a cost. Nothing, there's no free lunch. Every resource is limited. So whatever was invested in making women absolutely superior at giving birth and taking care of infants had to come at the expense of something else. So men must obviously be supreme at doing something else.
Let me put it to the history this way. Women used to be traded among tribes. You would trade your women out and get women in return. You did not want a young man to come into your tribe.
No, absolutely not.
Because you're going
to
you'll have to enslave him, or else he might take over and become the leader of the whole damn tribe.
Chimps still do this.
Yeah, they trade females, chimps.
No, they don't trade. It's that the females just sort of run away and go to a new tribe.
Well, that's what I mean by trade, in the sense that females can move back. Females are welcome to move back and forth.
Yes, but the men are stationary.
Yeah.
We still have a little bit of that in humans, in that men are the ones who are very territorial and want to defend the country, whereas women don't really mind moving around a little bit and having open borders to the same extent. So it goes back to the chimps. And my point is this: it's not that women are determined to think like this, but their biology is. I mean, the force is strong in this one. Right?
He's trying to avoid saying naughty things, but he.
So we can't ignore biology. Biology is part of the discussion, and it's like saying, like, if Jordan Peterson made this very good point. When was the last time you heard someone say, "Now I'm going to make like my New Year's resolution. I'm just going to become healthy, and I'm going to exercise every day, and I'm just going to be really good at doing everything I promised to do." Like, you can say that, but it's not going to happen. Like, there's the way Jordan Peterson says it, it's there's less of you than you think. And I like the way of thinking of that you have this core of free will, but you are the elephant rider, and you're riding this elephant, to use Jonathan Haidt's example, that your subconscious is this giant elephant that has its mind of its own, and you can sort of whip it around and push him a little bit, but if the elephant decides to go, it goes. So your life can be overtaken. And the best thing you can do in that time is to make your elephant look good by rationalizing why you do what you do. So
keep him washed.
Oh, the reason I did this, the reason I chose this is because I was feeling hungry. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's just your elephant that did it, and you're trying to make him look good. So I like this, that we have to. One of the reasons that we rationalize is like the blind spot in our eyes. We have certain areas in our eyes where we don't see things, but we can't really live a life where we have just this big black hole. So the mind just fills in so that life makes sense, and our volition is like this Swiss cheese full of holes, but our minds fills in the blanks. So that whenever we do something, it feels like we're in charge. So even when we're not in charge and the elephant is doing the riding, we are sort of filling in the gaps.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I cover that. I say that we have free will, and you can tell we have free will because sometimes we wake up.
Yes.
Like, you're not always here and awake. You're not always thinking about things. Sometimes you're sleeping, and sometimes you're zoned out on the way to work, and sometimes you're daydreaming, and sometimes whatever. But sometimes you're awake, and that's when you have free will. Yes.
And look, I'm not arguing about free will. I absolutely hate those guys. Like, I don't hate them, but the Sam Harris people, they are just like mental children. Like this idea that they're determined to believe that there's no free will. Like, what kind of crazy idea is that? So I'm not arguing against free will. I'm just saying that we can't fly to the moon. We don't have wings. We have limitations.
Right.
And free will also has limitations. And part of the limitation is that we have this elephant that is in our mind that is riding around, and we have only limited control over that elephant.
Mm-hmm.
So we're the elephant rider, and yes, we can control it, and we have beautiful control over that elephant, but it's not doing exactly as we want, and we can't command it to do anything we want. So we have limitations, so we shouldn't be focusing only on the limitations like the determinists do, which is like insane.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studies that show that if you believe that you are determined, that if you don't have free will, then you're less likely to have control over your own body.
I like the analogy of an elephant, because you can change its direction, but
Yes.
not right now.
That's right, and you have to sweet talk with it, and sometimes it doesn't work, and you get a panic, and what shall I do? And you try to get it under control, and if you're good, if you exercise and you train and become a good elephant rider, you can make it obey you pretty well. You can't make it dance, but that's beyond your capability. But
Well,
you can make it walk.
let's remember, the elephant doesn't really have a purpose. It thinks you have a purpose, and it'll go where you steer it.
The problem is that it's like these little critters in our mind, the subconscious persona. For some reason, our evolution has selected for a situation where it's beneficial for these little critters to believe that they have a mind of their own, so to speak. So our unconscious needs, they don't care about our consciousness. They just say, food, now, right? It's an overwhelming desire, and it just takes you over and doesn't care about the rest of what you think. It's your job to control it.
Yeah, and I'll give the example of a guy lost on a raft at sea, and he caught fish with his bare hands, and he was hungry for the eyeballs and the organs, and he put the eyeballs in his mouth and crunched them and enjoyed them. So
right.
even his biological appetites for food were taken over by an extreme need for nutrition in a way that he never could have imagined, that he would desire the carnal pieces inside of a fish.
Yes, and that's exactly right. You just said that.
Shall we? I've got another interview in a couple hours. Maybe we should draw a line here. And
this is a good place.
And continue.
Because I need to cough soon.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and let's do this again soon, because we've covered some stuff here, but I'll bet that the audience is going to have a few questions, and we can cover that in our next go-round. And while I'm thinking of it, before I forget, maybe you should be like my co-host once every week or two, and we'll have a third person and have conversations, because you don't want to invest and do a big thing right now. You're busy with the book, but maybe you could come on to talk once in a while.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd love that.
Good
and
deal.
Just one final thing. I just want to have a wrap up with the Objectivism thing, which is going around now. I just want to be a little bit careful about the mind-reading intentions that they are doing things on purpose and they're lying and blah, blah, blah. I advise you to pay attention to Scott Adams. He's like a Trump supporter. He has a lot of bad philosophy, but he's also really good on many topics. And the way he's approaching reality on like a prediction-based model, that he refuses to do mind reading. He's only have he's evaluating based on predictions. Is very good. So the point is this: like when James Valiant, I read his book and I love his book, Creating Christ, and like that. When he's saying things that you're putting up a meme with this gun and all of this thing, I think he's hallucinating.
Yeah.
So don't think that in his mind he's lying. He's just he has his internal movie. Now this is my theory. I can't read his mind, but I don't think he's actually making things up. if I'm going to try to interpret this thing, what's going on is that there's been a lot of mass shootings in America recently, and this is on the mind of everyone. And when Amy Peikoff and James Valiant sees memes with guns, and like I'm coming for you of leftists and stuff like that, their mind might be going to a very dark place. You see what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I'm just going to be like, I understand. I'm sort of able to put myself into your shoes. I see your view on that easily, but it's very easy for people who are not inside your head to think that maybe you are one of those crazy guys. And of course you're not, but you should be like aware of that this might be an issue. So I would be going a little bit easy on the gun going after of leftist memes, if you know what I mean. And I try to also not put intentions into their heads, like, oh, this was such a bad thing done by this person and he's lying and I can't believe that this was dishonest. Instead of doing that, assume that they're hallucinating, have that as your working hypothesis, and approach them and say, look, I think you're hallucinating, and I think you are thinking this about me. This is my theory, that in your mind you've seen me as this crazy person who believes this and this and this. I just want to make you aware that that's actually not true. Your theory about my mind is wrong.
If they were honest people that I wanted to deal with at all, then they would have mentioned me.
But here again, it's this thing in their mind. They might have might not think like you. They might think that if they mention you by name, that they've learned this idea that if you talk about a mass shooter's name, he will be more likely to do it, something like that. So in their minds, it's a crazy idea. But
now,
hear me out.
It's a leftist idea.
Yes, but here's the thing. It might just be their elephant riding. Like they're trying to make their elephant look good, as I talked about later. Just keep in your mind that there's less of their volition than they might think and than you think. And that be open to the possibility that their elephant is panicking. If you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so once you have that image in your mind that their elephant is running around crazy and they're just trying to make it look good. So look, the reason the elephant is running like crazy is because I like running in circles. Mm-hmm. And if you take this stance, it's much easier to open a dialogue.
No. They are riding their elephant in Southern California.
Okay, I see what you mean.
So they have to look like Southern California good, and that's it.
Right? Yeah, that's priceless. That's good. And but that's also, if you can explain this to people, that you understand that they're riding their, just like now you're saying that they have to play this California game for their audience, so that they can live in California with having being stabbed in the back by crazy leftists. So then you come off as more empathic and understanding, and you don't look like the bad guy, but you can still criticize them. Obviously, like it's a bad long-term strategy to give in to leftists, right?
Yeah.
But you can say that you understand from a personal point of view why they're afraid of crazy leftists, because leftists can be crazy. This is just some advice that be a little bit careful with making up this big rift in objectivism kind of thing. It might be a better idea to try to, from their point of view, look more reasonable, but at the same time making them absolutely aware that you don't regard them as good representatives of objectivism.
Well, so far my list of obleftivists has 3 people on it. Amy Peikoff, Keith Weiner, and James Valiant. So it's a really, really short list.
Okay, I'm definitely on board with Keith Weiner. Like, he's blocked me ages ago. I'm a friend with James Valiant. I've talked to him. He seems like a decent guy, and I feel that we have a good conversation, and we can talk ordinary objectivist
Yeah,
stuff without going into a level.
I've done private message with James Valiant, and I'm shocked that he would misrepresent me and tell that lie about me like that. That I had posted any such thing about Donald Trump, and then not even say my name so people could go and check for themselves.
If it's okay, I'll have a little chat with him about that.
Good luck
in private.
If I'm right and he's a leftist thinker and he can't be an individual about this, then good luck.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm going to talk to him and say, I think that you're hallucinating. That's what I'm going to say to him. And you can get control over your mind by hold on. If you're thinking someone is acting crazy, maybe they are crazy, but maybe there's something going on here. So I'm going to try to bring him back down on earth from the derangement syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome. Amy Peikoff I know less about, but there's something about her tone that seems very off to me. I've only heard her talking about transgenderism as perfectly equally natural. She was talking about sex being or gender being a social construct or stuff like that. That seemed like whoa. That's like crazy talk in my. But I know too little about her to make a judgment.
Well, that's the Southern California game.
All right. But it was good talking to you. We said we weren't going to talk for 4 hours, but we did, almost. But we split it up into two, so I think that's good. Yeah. But let's try to do this again, maybe next week. Okay. If you want to do it weekly, I'll try to do that.
All right. Sounds good. We'll definitely do that. Thanks a lot.
Very good conversation.
Yeah.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.